Good Vach, Shavua Tov, and welcome to the Shabbos Shuva Drasha Tafshin Pei Beis. Let me begin by thanking those who are here tonight, those who are in the room. This is the way a Shabbos Shuva Drasha is meant to be given. This is the way it's always been given, and please God, this is the way we will return to it being given, together, in person, with energy and electricity, gathering and coming together as a community, seeking to grow. It means the world to me that you came tonight, and I'm so appreciative that you're here together to be able to learn, to grow, and hopefully to be able to break through together to have our best year yet. To those who are joining online, we're grateful you are here too, and enjoy it while it lasts, because please God, circumstances will be such this will be the last time that this particular opportunity, Shabbos Shuva, will be broadcast in this way. Amen. You have source sheets on your seats. Those who are watching, you can find source sheets online. Karma, we can flash how they can find it online. I want to begin by thanking our generous sponsors. The minhag is to wear talis for Shabbos Shuva. We preserve that minhag even though it's Motzei Shabbos. Anyone can spare the comment of concern that we were broadcasting this on Shabbos. It is officially Motzei Shabbos, and I wish everyone a good vach and a gemar tov and a good year. I want to begin by thanking our generous sponsors of the Shabbos Shuva Drasha this evening. A huge thank you to the Friedman and the Cohen families, to extraordinary leader families in our community who do so much, who've done so much, and will do so much for our shul, for our schools, for our community as a whole. Tonight's drasha is dedicated in memory of two really extraordinary people who, no matter what we're talking about on Shabbos Shuva, they seem to exemplify, and they were role models exactly for those qualities that we are trying to live. Rabbi Simcha Friedman, alav shalom, and Helen Cohen, alav shalom, who not only were machatarim to one another and good friends, but were role models to each and every one of us. Rabbi Friedman, who had such a yearning to be close to Hashem. Rabbi Friedman, who stood up for the Jewish people, who had a love and avas Yisrael. Rabbi Friedman, who taught me so much about what it means to rally, to charge, what it means to make a difference, and not only to withdraw into our own community, but to try to bring a light and to repair the world around. We miss him terribly, and we hope our words tonight elevate his neshama each and every Shabbos Shuva. I can count on coming home, and not soon after Shabbos, finding an email from Rabbi Friedman with the kindest words and compliments, for the most part, with his feedback and suggestions as well, but they were equally cherished and loved because I knew exactly where they came from. Helen Cohen was an extraordinary woman who loved davening and loved singing. She loved the Jewish people. She loved the land and state of Israel. She loved Jewish children and Jewish continuity and dedicated her life to all of these values and more. Mark, we hope you find comfort as we dedicate our words tonight in her memory, as you continue to stand for those same values that you've passed on to your next generations, and they should continue to feel that impact of Helen's sweet voice telling us and encouraging us and urging us and pushing us and challenging us to be better and better and better. Her life story was remarkable, and we dedicate our words in her memory. And lastly, as today is the 20th anniversary of 9/11, of September 11th, like one of those dates that everyone remembers exactly where they were, we remember where we were on 9/11 20 years ago. And so many lives, thousands of lives, were needlessly lost. And we want to dedicate our words in their memory to those who lost their lives trying to rescue, to those who lost their lives patriotically fighting and defending our freedom, and to those who continue to risk their lives, and those whose lives have continued to be affected by the results of 9/11. We dedicate our Divrei Torah tonight in their memory. As I wrote about, when I think about 20 years ago, I don't only think about 9/11, but I think about 9/12 and 9/13 and 9/14, and the way that this country came together and people set aside their differences to feel a sense of unity, of cohesiveness, to feel a shared history, and to try to chart a shared destiny. And as much as we commemorate 20 years of 9/11, I think it's important for us to commemorate those feelings of 9/12 and 9/13, to rediscover them and to regenerate them and to bring them back within the Jewish community and our destiny, and with the shared future with the American counterparts and with the entire world. The Dalai Lama walked up to a hot dog stand to get a hot dog. How's that for a transition? The Dalai Lama walked up to a hot dog stand to get a hot dog. He ordered the hot dog with all the trimmings, everything on it. He applied his mustard, and he asked the vendor how much it is. The vendor said, "It's $4. The Dalai Lama handed him a $5 bill and stood there waiting for his change, but the vendor moved on to the next customer and seemed to be ignoring him totally. So the Dalai Lama finally asked him, "Excuse me, sir, you said it's $4. I gave you a $5 bill. Where is my change?" And the vendor looked at the Dalai Lama and said, change must come from within. We're here tonight to talk about change. And to not look for it to come from without, to not try to find the solution everywhere around us, to not point a finger and blame and wish and dream if only circumstances were different, we could break through and we could have our breakthrough year and we could be the people we were meant to be. It's time to take extreme ownership we've spoken about, and extreme responsibility, and to break through those limitations, those habits, which are self-imposed. Yes, the world around us, particularly over these last 2 years, has introduced variables and limitations and challenges that we're all struggling with. On Rosh Hashanah, we spoke about it's okay to not be okay, and in so many ways, we're still struggling to be okay. And yet, as much as we're not in control of it, as much as we can change, there still is so much that we can. And the only one holding us back is ourselves. There was an individual who was walking through an encampment of elephants, taking a tour of the elephants that were raised there and trained there and grown there. And he noticed grown elephants who the only thing holding them, the only thing keeping them in that habitat was a small rope tied around an ankle. And he wondered, this enormous elephant, it weighs several tons, it's incredibly strong. Surely it can snap the rope easily and escape. So he asked the trainer, these elephants, they're enormous, they're strong. Why don't they simply break the rope and set themselves free? Listen to what the trainer told him. He said, the way we raise elephants, when they're very young, when they're first born, we tie that rope in order to keep them still, in order to monitor their whereabouts, in order to secure their location and make sure they don't run off. And at that young age, when they're first born, that tiny little newborn elephant, that rope is enough to keep them there. And when the elephant grows, the elephant never learns that now it has the strength to break the rope. So even at an older age, and even as a grown, full, enormously strong elephant, that little rope from its youth that originally held it in its place, it never learns or realizes that it's able to now break free. And there's a concept called learned helplessness, that we think that we have habits, and we think there are behaviors, and we think there's rope, and we think there's momentum, and it limits us. We think that it traps us. It holds us in place. And we don't realize that we have that strength, that maybe the habits and the behaviors of last year or last decade or early in our life, maybe those were formed, but now we're stronger, now we're different, now we're better. And if only we apply ourselves, if only we think about it, we have the capacity to break free. And that's what I want to talk to you about tonight. I realize when the Shabbos Shuva Drush is Motzei Shabbos, there's no Marav endpoint. We have till the first Slichos tomorrow morning. I'm looking at the clock, don't worry. You made the right decision to come in person, and I want to again, it's making me emotional to look around this room and see how many of you came out, and to see this full room once again, and the way it was, and that return to hopefully, please God, be bigger and better than ever. It means the world to me, because I know you had the option to have a bucket of popcorn and a slice of pizza and be in your pajamas, but you're here. Some of you may be in your pajamas, but you look good. You're here, and it means the absolute world to me. So how do we break through? What are these habits? How are they formed? How do we break through? What are some strategies as we find ourselves in these Aseres Yimei Tshuva, as we are counting down to Yom Kippur, as we're working on ourselves to have our best year yet? What are some things that we can do? So you'll say, well, Shabbos Shuva, Rabbi, shouldn't you talk about Yirah Shamayim? Speak about the yoke of heaven and fear of heaven. Why are you talking about habits and qualities and midos? Why are you fixated on punctuality, on how good we are with time, on cleanliness, on patience, on kindness? All of these human qualities, they're lovely. Let motivational speakers, Tony Robbins can cover it in January and February. Why Aseres Yimei Tshuva, Rabbi? You have a packed house. You have people's attention. Talk about Yirah Shamayim. Talk about a fear of heaven. Talk about being better Jews, more Amunah and Dveikus. Talk about being more vigilant and scrupulous in our observance of mitzvahs and halacha. And we are going to talk about all of that. But it begins with who we are and how we regulate ourselves, because we can have all the vision in the world. We can have all the ideas and dreams, all the ambitions and aspirations to live that best life. But if we don't regulate ourselves, if we're not in control of ourselves, if we don't have discipline over ourselves, then we can't achieve any of those dreams. Rav Chaim Vital, the great Rav Chaim Vital, in source number 1, Don't get lost in the source sheets. We're only going to reference most of them. They're there for you to read and study afterwards. I've collected a lot of fantastic articles and Torah sources, and I hope that you'll look at it and take it with you, not only tonight, but in the days and weeks that come. And Rav Chaim Vital writes in the Shari Kedusha, he writes, Nimtza, ki yoser tzorach lizar mimidos ros, yoser mikiyim mitzvahs aseh v'los aseh, ki biyoso b'amidos tovos b'nakil yekayim kol ha-mitzvos. You know what the shortcut, the route to living a virtuous life? How can you live that life with awe of heaven? How will you live that life being careful to live a lifestyle of halacha, of Jewish law and Torah and mitzvos? It begins by being able to refine our character. If you're not a person who has discipline, if you're not punctual on time, if you're not clean and neat, and you don't have a commitment to order in your life, then you can't possibly live those values and qualities. The Gra, the Heilige Vilna Gaon in Source 2, Evan Shlema says the same. Serving Hashem begins with developing good habits and good practices, with regulating our lives and regulating ourselves. Because one can't possibly realize those values. The Orchos Tzaddik in 15th century Germany, I don't care if you pledge and promise with your mouth. You could be the most righteous and the most religious in your heart. But if you always show up late, if you never concentrate, if you forget to make a bracha, if you're discourteous and unkind, you could say, I have the nicest heart, and I volunteer and I care about all people, and really I want to help everyone. Lovely. Have you made a meal for someone? Have you checked in and made a phone call? Are you organized in your life? This is not a new age, newfangled idea in 2021, Tafshin Pei Beis, that I stand before you and tell us that if we do not refine our character, and if we don't regulate ourselves, and we don't live with self-awareness, and we don't improve our habits, then we can't possibly fulfill the dream and vision of Torah and mitzvos. Chaim Vital, the Vilna Gaon, the Orchos Tzaddikim, and many more. The Pachad Yitzchak, Rav Hutner's Atzal, source number 4. Rav Hutner says the truth of the matter is the power of change. Koach shel Shuva hi harabutza yotze gedol achrei hapela shel bria shamayim va'aretz. The greatest power, the greatest breakthrough that ever happened in the history of the world after the creation, next Nilo, after God created the world, the second greatest act of creation is the person who recreates themselves. There are people in this room who've lost enormous amounts of weight. There are people in this room who used to fly off the handle, who now practice incredible patience. There are people in this room who used to be stingy, and now they're chasing me, wanting to give tzedakah because they've learned how good it feels. When a person transforms and is reborn, when they redefine themselves anew, that is as great a breakthrough and a creation as the creation of heaven and earth, says Rav Hutner. The Vilna Gaon again, source 5, a pasuk in Mishlei. Hold fast to discipline. Don't let go. It is your life. And writes the Gaon, I'm sorry, it's blurry in the 4th line. He says, we live to break the qualities that we've not yet broken. Each of us are born with certain predispositions. Each of us have certain struggles or challenges. Every one of us is different. Some of us are foodies. We love food. We can never get enough food. We love the texture. We love the flavor. We love the taste. And our life, from when we wake up in the morning until we're on our way to sleep at night, we are engaged in a royal battle about not eating foods we shouldn't eat, at times we shouldn't eat, in quantities we shouldn't eat. And then there's Rabbi Moskowitz. He wakes up in the morning, and the Rebbitzin has to remind him, don't forget to eat. And then she checks in later in the day, says, don't forget to eat. Each of us have struggles, and each of us have things that come easy. And says the Vilna Gaon, we live, we are alive, and we should see those challenges. I'll call you before Yom Kippur. We'll probably talk a few times before then. We should see those challenges and struggles as not nuisances. We should see them as gifts from above, because they are lighting the way of what we need to work on. What comes difficult, what is a struggle and a challenge, is exactly the area and arena of our greatest breakthrough. This is why we're alive, says the Vilna Gaon. We live to break through, to transform, to recreate, to become the people we are meant to be. You think it's easy? Says the Or Yechezkel, Rav Yechezkel Levenstein quotes the founder of the Musar movement, Rav Yisrael Salanter. Rav Yisrael Salanter famously stated, Kal Yoser Leida Shas Ba'al Peh. It's easier to memorize all of Talmud. It's easier to commit Shas to memory than to change one quality. So you think it's easy? It's not easy. It's incredibly difficult. It's easier to learn all of Torah, all of Shas, than to change one quality. So do we really have that power? Do we have that ability? The next thing I'm going to tell you is shocking. It's a good thing you're all sitting down. You may even fall off your chair. We are all raised to believe from a very young age that a critical component of our lives is the notion of free will, what we call in Hebrew, bechira chashis. Free will, we make choices. We make choices from when we wake up in the morning. Am I going to hit snooze 3 times or only once? Am I going to jump out of bed or am I going to take my time? Before we've ever left our bed, do you know how many decisions we've already made? So we're under the impression, will I be on time? Will I be late? Will I concentrate? Will my mind wander? What will I eat for breakfast? Will it be healthy? Will it be fattening? Will I stop while I'm full or will I keep eating? Will I drive like a maniac or will I drive in a safe way? Well, there's a million decisions that we make almost before we've even begun our day, and we're under the impression, we have the conception that we have free will. And after all, doesn't the Torah endorse that? Uvacharta v'chayim. Doesn't the Torah empower us and tell us that there's so many choices in life? What to watch, what to listen to, what to say, where to go, what to believe, how to think, what lifestyle to have, what to prioritize. There are no shortages of choices we make. And when we make those decisions, we are forging and molding our life, right? Wrong. Source number 7, page 3. This article in The Atlantic is not only fascinating, this article in The Atlantic is deeply disturbing. It's not a short article. If you're having trouble falling asleep later tonight, I encourage you to read it while you are in bed. But it quotes the modern science, and it has the contention that there is no such thing as free will. Science and research has studied the brain and neurons, understands our genetics and our history, sees the intersection between nature and nurture, and has come to the conclusion that as much as we think we're making decisions, you made the decision to come tonight. You made the decision to wear this. You made the decision whether you came on time, early or late. You're making the decision right now, whether you've begun that process of going to sleep tonight, or you're still with me and you're listening. There are decisions we think that we're making, but really the brain is wired that all those decisions are happening anyway. And we don't have the time, but I've highlighted, I've underlined and bolded certain sections that jumped out to me. But that makes the contention that we don't actually make these choices in our life. Brain scans have enabled us to peer inside a living person's skull, revealing intricate networks of neurons, allowing scientists to reach broad agreement. And these networks are shaped by both genes and environment. But there's also agreement in the scientific community that the firing of neurons determines not just some or most, but all of our thoughts, hopes, memories, and dreams. Essentially, when is the last person here made the choice for their heart to beat? When is the last person here consciously chose to breathe? I don't mean deep breathing, meditation exercises. I mean, while you were preoccupied with something else, every breath, and there are many we take an hour and a day, that we made the decision. The human body is designed that we spontaneously, our heart beats, and spontaneously we breathe. And research is concluding that similarly, the brain is sending off neurons in such a spontaneous fashion that we are not willing. We don't really have free will. There's much more that we do not decide than we ever do decide. The odds that you'd be wearing this outfit, this fashion statement, if you were living 100 or 200 years ago or 10 years ago are very, very small. Or that you'd be wearing it in 10 or 20 or 100 years from now. So you think you chose that fashion statement, what you're wearing right now is what appeals to you, and I'm an individual, and this is my expression. Nobody is choosing these tight pants, men. I promise you. I'm trying to talk everyone out of it. Let it go. Let's go back to the way it was and sit comfortably. But alas, though we're not choosing it, we have no free will. It's being chosen by the women in our lives. No, it's being chosen by the people around us. So science concludes further studies, I'm on page 5, have linked a diminished belief in free will to stress, unhappiness, and a lesser commitment to relationships. The reason science has suppressed this discovery is because imagine you woke up in the morning and you realized, I don't really have free will. That nothing I'm going to decide today, I'm really deciding. It's been predetermined, pre-programmed by my genetics, by my genes, by my conditioning, by my nature, by the time in which I live. That is enormously disempowering, it's enormously depressing, and it has enormous negative mental health impacts. So science has intentionally suppressed this contention and this discovery, although now it is coming out, and it's been a dilemma whether they should share it or not. According to Harris Bottom on page 6, we should acknowledge that even the worst criminals, murderous psychopaths, are in a sense unlucky. They didn't pick their genes, they didn't pick their parents, they didn't make their brains, and yet their brains are the source of their intentions and their actions. In a deep sense, their crimes are not their fault. Recognizing this, we can dispassionately consider how to manage offenders in order to rehabilitate them, protect society, reduce future offending. It might be possible to cure something like psychopathy, but only if we accept that the brain and not some airy-fairy free will is the source of the deviancy. Again, it's pretty shocking, it's pretty startling, it's very disturbing, and we think that it has nothing to do with Judaism. Read this article on your own, you'll be disturbed. So what does Judaism believe? Does Judaism agree? Or in fact, we wake up, isn't this whole time of the year, Elul and Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah through Yom Kippur, isn't it all about the admission and the recognition, I'm in charge, I'm in control, I make decisions, I need to make better ones. I can make better ones, I will make better ones. So source 9, page 9, source 8, the Ale Shor of Wolbe, the great Rav Shlomo Wolbe Zatzal. His grandson just moved. I welcome him to our community. We're very honored to have him. So the Ale Shor of Wolbe, we're going to quote him several times tonight, says something startling. Towards the bottom, Gedolei Chachmei HaMechaker HaRishonim. The great Jewish philosophers established Bechira as the cornerstone for the whole Torah. But from this resulted a common misperception among the masses, that all people actively choose their every act and every decision. This is a grievous error. Judaism, too, rejects the notion that we are in control of absolutely everything, that there is free will in every area and every aspect of our lives. Rav Wolbe says this in a wonderful work he has called Zriya Ubinyan. It's been translated, Planting and Building. It's about how to educate and how to raise children. And he quotes the Vilna Gaon, that certain things cannot be changed. Someone who's born under certain astrological signs, somebody who has certain DNA, certain genetics, certain chemistry, somebody who's born in a certain time in a certain place, does not have free will to transcend or supersede. We are the product of so much that goes into who we are. That's not only secular science and research, that's our sacred Torah. The Vilna Gaon, Rav Wolbe, Rav Tzadok HaKohen, and many others. Rav Ben Zion Sorotzkin, whose nephew just moved to our community, Rav Ben Zion Sorotzkin, Dr. Sorotzkin, has a phenomenal article called How Free is Free Will, where he addresses this and shares many of these sources. It's safe to say over the last year that wherever you are in the world, you have a family member who's moved to our community. So I'm not going to keep repeating that, it would be a redundancy. So the Rav Wolbe writes that the Vilna Gaon says it's not true that we can change anything. One cannot change someone fundamentally, transforming him from the sort of person born under the astrological sign of Ma'adim into the sort of person born under the astrological sign of Tzedek. For example, the right column. A child whose nature is to be constantly active cannot be transformed into someone who sits and reads 20 hours a day. If we force the child to do so, we will damage or lose him. Later, the child will go his way or do whatever they like with him, which might be different from what his parents intended. So Rav Wolbe takes this to the extreme and says, our children have genetic predispositions. And if we're trying to conform or squeeze them into a box, if we are denying part of their very essence or core or definition, then we're only driving them away. We have to absolutely not make children conform to our expectations, but make our expectations conform to who those children are, because we do not, in fact, have entirely free will. Rav Tzadok HaKohen says it most remarkably. Rav Tzadok writes in Tzidkas HaTzadik, Os Mem Gimel, it's not in the source sheets, but he says, in fact, we like to say God doesn't send a test that you can't pass. Rav Tzadok writes, it's not true. There are tests that we cannot pass. Cape Cod, potato chips, at 11:30 p.m., after preparing the Shabbos Shuva drasha, long day, broke the fast, still hungry. It's a test that can't be passed. Not by me. Those are potato chips. They crunch, they're kettle, they're delicious, they're so good. Do you know what a potato chip is? He says, Ones Rachmana Patre. That's the language of Rav Tzadok HaKohen. That there are certain predispositions we have that are so strong that in fact, Ones Rachmana Patre, when it comes to that violation or crossing that boundary, we are onus. We had no choice, we had no free will. Rav Dessler, in his Mechtav Me'Eliyahu, has a long kuntras, a long essay on this topic. He talks about Bechira. How much free will do we really have? I provided it for you, the whole thing in Hebrew and in English in his translation, and Strive for Truth as well. And again, for the sake of time, I don't want to belabor or read too much of it inside. But look on page 15 in the bottom right corner. The essence of Bechira, how free is free will? How many choices are we really making? And how much are we in patterns? And how much are we predisposed? Bechira depends on the person. There is no outside cause involved. The prime cause is the person himself. This is well known to anyone who's even exercised his bechira and conquered his evil inclination. Such a person feels with the utmost clarity that he has relinquished illusion and opted for truth. The bechira point. This is what the Rav Dessler calls nekudas habechira. When I first heard this, when I learned this, it blew my mind. He says so much of our day that we think we're making choices, we're really making very few choices. The habits, the patterns that we've set, the predispositions we already have, the environment in which we're in, that has already made so many of the choices for us. So where do we choose? We choose, he says, in what's called the nekudas habechira, the bechira point. And listen to what he writes. When two armies are locked in a battle, fighting takes place only at the battlefront. Territory behind the lines of one army is under that army's control, and little or no resistance need to be expected there. A similar situation prevails in respect of territory behind the lines of the other army. If one side gains a victory at the front and pushes the enemy back, the position of the battlefront will have changed. In fact, therefore, fighting takes place only at one location, though potentially the line could be drawn anywhere in the territories of the two contending countries. In other words, behind the battlefront, each army has conquered territory. It has its land. There's no battle. It's only the very little narrow area called the battlefront where the battle happens. And each of us have a battlefront in our life. Each of us have the nekudas habechira. And our mission, our challenge, our goal is to isolate and identify and to narrow in what can I change and what do I have to let go? What am I predisposed and programmed? And where is my nekuda? Where's my battlefront? And he gives several examples. I'll give you an example. The fact that I choose every day not to eat a pork product, is that a reflection of my free will? And do you think when I get upstairs after 120 years, there'll be a big parade and welcome committee celebrating that Goldberg didn't eat pork products? Is that a big achievement? Is that a big success? Is that a reflection of a choice I've made? So Rav Dessler says no. Rav Dessler says if you were raised religious and you are religious and you believe in religion, you're not battling on the choice. Potato chips or Trader Joe's corn chips, that's a nekudas habechira. There's a battle. I can give you the rest of my kryptonite list if you'd like it, offline. But pork products for me, non-kosher is not a temptation. There's no battle whatsoever. The same equal opposite truth for somebody who's not been raised religious and has not had an education and has never experienced what it means to be an observant Torah Jew. Are they held responsible or accountable if they eat non-kosher? Are they battling? Is it a point of bechira? Are they making a choice to eat non-kosher? They're not making a choice to eat non-kosher. They're not even aware that there's a kosher option. So Rav Dessler, what comes out that fascinatingly is so consistent with science. Science, as you'll see, this will be a theme tonight and into tomorrow morning. The theme tonight. The theme tonight is that science is only catching up to what the Torah knew all along. So the Atlantic has this breakthrough article. Turns out we don't have much free will. Rav Dessler's like, duh. We've known that since God created us. But what I want to talk to you, address specifically is our effort to narrow in, to zoom in on the area, our nekudas habechira. Where could I be better? What could I improve upon? How can I be a better version of myself? What are the components that I am who I am? My height's not going to change. My hairline, for the better, is not at this point going to change. There are things that are genetically programmed and built in. There are things I have to let go of and concede. But there's a whole area of life that is nekudas habechira. To not relinquish and not abandon and not concede and not give up on the free will that we absolutely do continue to have. The habits that we form. The Gemara already said this, Kedushin Daf Mem, source 11. When a person has crossed a boundary, when you've made a mistake, when you violated something. So the first time that you did it, you feel guilt, you feel shame. And guilt and shame are healthy feelings. This time of year, Yom Noraim, even though ordinarily when we bless a new month, we ask for a life that has no busha uchlima, no shame. The shame that makes me embarrassed is negative. But the shame that makes me feel ashamed to God, pasnish, I'm capable of so much more that was beneath me. I could do better, I could do more. It's embarrassing, it's shameful. I'm ashamed that I said that. I'm ashamed I went there. I'm ashamed I watched that. I'm ashamed I thought that. I'm ashamed I behaved that way. That's a healthy shame. That's a good shame. That's a good shame. So the first time a person crosses a boundary, they feel ashamed. And that's good. But the Gemara so astutely understands the human psyche that the second time we do it, we say, maybe what I did isn't really technically wrong. Maybe it wasn't so bad. And the Gemara wonders, really? It becomes a heter? It was asur, it was forbidden. You looked at something, you said something, you went somewhere, you did something, you know you're not allowed to. It's the ABCs, it's black and white, you're not allowed to. And the first time you do it, you cross that boundary, you're filled with shame. Again, psychology today talks about people who act out in ways that violate their own moral and ethical code. They feel guilty afterwards. People who act out and behave by watching and acting and doing certain behaviors, often the science shows, the research shows, they feel filled with guilt. They engage in an activity that was supposed to have given them a tremendous sense of pleasure. Why do they feel guilt? Because when you cross your own moral boundary that we've said, when we're living an incongruous, inconsistent life where our behavior doesn't match what we say we believe, we feel guilt. But it's hard to live with guilt and it's hard to live with shame. So what ends up happening is, the second time we do it, then hutralo. We don't see it as forbidden. We don't see it as a boundary we crossed. We don't see it as violating a code that we have. Now we see it as something which is permissible. The Gemara says, do you really think it becomes mutter? It says it's asur. You think it became mutter? It's forbidden. It became permissible? No, sakadait nasa lo keheter. It's as if. The Bali Musar goes second. The Bali Musar say, and by the third time you do it, nasa lo mitzvah. Now it's not just something which is permissible, it's that this is a mitzvah. Are you kidding? I have to watch that because I have to be aware of what the kids are watching. And if I'm going to inspire and motivate the kids and do outreach, then I have to watch what everybody's watching, even with the scenes and the language that it has. It went from being something that I felt really guilty and ashamed. That was episode 1. Episode 2, nasa lo keheter. It's really not so bad. I look away. I saw online someone else posted who I admire and they watch it. It's permissible. And by the third time, it's a grace of mitzvah, big tzaddik. I'm doing a mitzvah, taking one for the team. I shouldn't be watching it, but if I want to do outreach and I want to inspire the next generation and talk to the kids, leave me alone. I'm doing a mitzvah over here. I got to watch the entire series in one night. So the Gemara understands that the things that we habituate ourselves in, the habits that we form, they define us. And they put us on this sense of an autopilot. And now, in order to justify or rationalize how we could be doing those things if they're inconsistent with what we claim we believe, we no longer believe that they're wrong. They just become a pattern. They become part of our life. That's true in the negative. That's the Gemara in Kedushin. It can be true in the positive. David HaMelech, King David in Tehillim tells us, Chishavti d'rachai v'ashiva raglai al edosecha. I've considered my ways, and I turned back to your decrees. What does that mean? So the Medrash in Vayikra Rabbah expands. David HaMelech says to God, Amar David Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the universe. Every day I intend on going to work. Every day I'm on my way to someone's house. I have all kinds of plans. I plug it into Waze. But you know what happens? But my feet take me elsewhere. Hashem, I love you so much. And I'm so drawn to be with you. Shifti b'veis Hashem, all I want is to sit in your house all day long, that even though I'm trying to go elsewhere, but my feet take me. My feet take me to your shul, to your beis medrash. This sense of pattern, of road, of habit works in both directions. What's amazing is that since so much of our lives is determined by habits, if we form the right ones, we end up in shul and the beis medrash. If we form the wrong ones, we end up with high blood pressure and diabetes. We make the decision which habits we form, but once we form them and we begin to live that way with the momentum that carries us, it can be in one of two directions. I'll never forget, when we moved, we used to live in Captiva, and we moved to Thornhill Green. And it was a good month after we moved. I was driving home from somewhere, and I found myself in the driveway in Captiva. And I was about to get out of the car and go into what was no longer my home. And I realized, how did I get here? I didn't remember one moment of the drive from when I departed until I got to that destination. But what happened? Autopilot. And how many of us are on autopilot all the time in our lives? We're eating on autopilot, and we're speaking and gossiping on autopilot, and we're flying off the handle and getting angry and expressing rage or frustration on autopilot. We're living our lives on autopilot, but if we can change the destination, the coordinates, then we can get to a much better place for ourselves. This is also the interpretation of what the Jewish people, what it means to be an Am Kashay Oref, source 16. After the Chet HaEgel, this gross and terrible violation where the Jewish people practiced infidelity from God, we built an idol and worshipped it. We cheated on God on our wedding night. And God says, I'm done. Vayamar Hashem Moshe. Ra'isi esa'am hazeh. Incredulously, God says, I've seen this people. V'nei am kshe orefu. And they are a stiff-necked, stubborn, obstinate, impossible people. Impossible. I'm done. All I do is shower them with bracha. All I do is give them miracles, freedom. I redeem them from Egypt. I shower them with blessings. And all they do is rebel. And all they do is revolt. And all they do is complain. I'm done. They're so stubborn. They're inflexible. I'm done. Why is the description of the person who's stubborn or obstinate stiff-necked? Why do we describe them as somebody who has a stiff neck? Zakt Rashi, source 17, says Rashi, Machzirin kshe arpam leneged mochachim, u'meman in l'shmoa. What does it mean they're stiff-necked? It means somebody standing there telling them, you know, you could be better. You know that was beneath you. And you know what they do? They arch their back, and they stiff their neck, and they don't turn to listen to the person who's giving them the encouragement. We're stiff-necked. We don't adjust or pivot or turn to listen and to learn from the people and the things that are trying to inform and inspire us. And we're guilty of being the stiff-necked people. Being stiff-necked people. That's Rashi. The Abarbanel says stiff-necked means that a person who's living a virtuous life, the best life, is able to turn their neck and look and anticipate the consequence of their behavior. Then not only to live in the moment of the right now, does this taste good? Do I want this? But how will it leave me feeling, and what will it do to my health? Saying this feels good, but how will it impact the relationship that I have? A healthy person is able to look to the future and anticipate the consequence of behavior. But if you're stiff-necked, then you can't turn, adjust, pivot. You can't rotate. You're not flexible to see the consequence. Says the Abarbanel, that's why God reacts and says they're stiff-necked people. But I want to share with you Rav Avraham ben Rambam. The Rambam had a son named Rav Avraham. It's got to be a lot of pressure if your last name is Ben HaRambam. I'm sure he has a family member in Boca. Anyone here descend from the Rambam? Rav Avraham ben Rambam says the following. He says, you know what it means to be a stiff-necked person? It means that you're stuck in your habits. This is who I am. Take me as I am. This is it. This is who I am. I'm a finished product. This is my habit. This is my behavior. I don't go for walks. I don't exercise. This is the way I eat. This is the way I speak. You know that person who crosses some lines, they're a little outrageous in public settings. And when someone tries to encourage them or give them some rebuke, they say, look, this is who I am. I'm the life of the party. I'm the quiet one. I'm the outgoing one. I'm the late one. I'm the on-time one. We think that we're set in our way. We're stubborn. It says of Rambam, stiff-necked she'oraf means that we think we're locked and we're fixed. And the Alter of Kelm, Rav Simcha Zissel Ziv, in source 18 writes, in his Chochmah U'Musar so beautifully, Chazal tell us, the Gemara in Shabbos, Ein lecha parana shelo yisarei ba'avan ha'egel. Every mistake we make until today has a root in the sin of the egel. The Chet HaEgel animates and informs the mistakes we're still making today. What do our rabbis mean by that? The fact that I ate the wrong thing or said the wrong thing or went to the wrong place today, what does that have to do with the sin of the golden calf thousands of years ago? Says the Altam of Kelm, it stems from the same problem. That we're creatures of habit, and that we follow through on our appetite, our temptation, our drive, and we refuse to adjust or transform our habits. They thought Moshe was taking too long to come down from the mountain, and when they were nervous or anxious, they reverted back to their old habit of idolatry. They built the Egel. We go back to our habits, but we have to break through. The Tanya, in Perek Yudaleh, source 19, I want to thank my Chavrusa, who's really my Rebbe, Rabbi Tauger. We learned Tanya together. Source 19, in Perek Yudaleh, the 14th chapter of Tanya, the Baal Tanya, the Alter Rebbe, describes how we can strive to live that level of righteousness by controlling and regulating and being disciplined with our sense of selves. And the obstacle to it, at the top of page 23, the Tanya concludes this chapter, habits reign supreme, and the habit becomes second nature. Rav Steinsaltz, when he elaborates and elucidates in source 20, when we become accustomed to something, habit becomes a second nature. Though not as strong perhaps as first nature, it is nonetheless inseparably embedded into our souls. So says the Baal Tanya, then you'll have an Isra. If we accustom ourselves to despise bad things, so I look at those potato chips or corn chips and I see them as poison. I see them as preventing me from getting on the floor to play with my grandchildren in several years or decades from now. I see them as shortening my lives and as a form of suicide, then I will habituate myself to despise them. They will no longer be the Nekudas HaBechira. I no longer have to wage a battle with them. I can see them as the enemy. Why would I put that in my system any more than I would put any other poison in my system? We can learn and we can habituate ourselves to despise that which will bring us down physically, emotionally, or spiritually. And the inverse, we can habituate ourselves and we can learn to love that which will elevate us and make us live more healthy physically and emotionally and spiritually. So now I want to spend the rest of our time giving you some strategies. How do we do it? How do we do it? So number one, what we talked about is this is important to talk about. Yes, Yiras Shamayim and Avas Hashem. Yes, Torah and mitzvahs. Yes, halacha. Awe and fear of God, loving God, clinging to God. We talk about that every shiur, every week, all year round. And we will continue to. And yes, being vigilant and scrupulous in our observance of halacha of Jewish law, absolutely non-negotiable. Expectation of every one of us as good Jews. However, we can't live those lives if we're not living our best lives. And we can't live our best lives if we don't isolate and identify where I have control, how I can break my bad habits and form good ones. I heard a podcast earlier this year with Leo Babauda. I don't know Leo Babauda, but he was a fascinating life story he told. It wasn't that long ago that Leo Babauda was 70 pounds overweight. He had tried to quit smoking 7 times and failed. And he was so poorly disciplined in his own personal life and financial life that he had to break open his kids' piggy bank one night to collect some loose change to buy them cereal to serve them dinner. That's how low he had fallen. That's how low he had fallen. Fast forward, he began to make some changes in his life. And he started a blog in order to hold himself accountable and to share what he was doing with others called zenhabits.net, Z-E-N habits.net. And fast forward, he lost 70 pounds and he quit smoking and he competes in marathons and he has millions of followers online. And he's written best-selling books and he's a motivational speaker and he's extraordinarily wealthy and successful in every measure, including, most importantly, the happiness factor, his emotional, his relationships. Here, for example, on page 24 is an interview the Washington Post did with him. 2005, he smoked cigarettes, ate junk food, was disorganized, deeply in debt. Now he's trim, runs triathlons, ran a 50-mile ultra marathon. He eats a vegan diet. We won't hold that part against him. He cleared out clutter. He probably eats kale even. He cleared out clutter and his inbox, eliminated debt, saved up energy, emergency funding, wrote a best-selling book. So they interviewed with him and he talked about, and the themes that he talks about in this interview and the articles that follow are what I want to share with you and unpack a little bit together this evening. He talks about what he calls micro changes, not trying to radically transform ourselves too quickly, too fast, too much. We tend to do that this time of year, every year. I'll never speak Lashon Hara again. I'll never be late to shul again. I'll never not have kavod. I'll never. And then before Sukkot is even over, we're like, what was that again? Everybody knows that the month of January, every gym spikes in those who've signed up for membership. And everybody knows by February, nobody's going. Because when we take on these mega changes, we end up not changing at all. And what we need are small micro changes, little things where we taste success, where we have breakthrough that can create a momentum and enable us become the runway to make bigger and more significant changes in our life. He writes, I started by giving up smoking. Every time I had the urge to smoke, I just sit there. What I didn't realize is that was a form of meditation. And then when I found myself stressed, instead of smoking, I'd go out for a run. That was my stress release. He talks about when I made a small change and succeeded, I created a positive spiral. The more I succeeded at something, the more I began to trust myself. And then the more I succeeded. I was motivated to succeed. That was huge for me too. That's why I started Zen Habits, to continue having accountability for my own changes. We can make changes, but if we don't have people around us that's going to hold us accountable and encourage us to continue those changes, then we're going to stumble, we're going to fall, and we're going to fail. And here's what he writes about failure. Because in every effort to make changes, we're going to run into that wall. We get very excited. We go through that phase where we say, potato chips, corn chips, it's poison. I'd never put that in my system. I'd never eat that again. You could put it out in front of me. I have no temptation. I'd never eat it. And then comes that Motzei Tzom Gedalia Shabbos Shuva prep, middle of the night, craving. You've run into that wall and you failed. You started with the one chip But the time the second one, Nasala Keheter, by the third ship, it was a mitzvah. It's almost Yom Kippur, it's a mitzvah. I got to bulk up, it's going to be Yom Kippur. Now what? Now you're off the wagon. The next day, what happens? You double up with the sequel, the Trader Joe corn chips? What happens the next day? He says, I fail all the time. I tried to quit smoking 7 times and failed 7 times before I finally made it stick. Why did I love that sentence? Why do you love that he failed specifically? Not 6 times and not 8 times. Sheva yipol tzadik v'kam. Shlomo HaMelech tells us 7 times you fall and you get up. Tzaddik. The tzaddik falls 7 times and gets up. In order to be a tzaddik, you have to have fallen first and get up. He writes, when I first failed, it was a hit to my self-image, but then I started to observe and learn from failure. And rather than think I failed because something is wrong with me, instead of thinking failure is a reflection of something's wrong with me, failure is a teacher. Failure is a tool. Failure is an instrument to learn from and to illuminate the path of how to break through and to be greater. So I printed for you 2 blog entries because in both he makes the point that I want to share with you. This really blew my mind. I had never heard it or considered it or thought of it, but I've been trying to practice it ever since. And Baruch Hashem, I'm trying to have success with it. It's an amazing, amazing idea. I really, really loved it. And we'll see in a moment, of course, the Torah knew about it long before Leo Babauda. Any Babaudas moved to Boca? Not yet. Soon. He says the problem is that we want instant gratification. We feel an urge. At the root of so many of the bad habits we have. People trying to quit gambling, trying to quit smoking, trying to quit drinking. People trying to quit watching things that are inappropriate to be watching online. People trying to quit being late, perpetually always running late, overcommitting. People trying to commit being stingy or angry or frustrated or having no patience. The problem is all of these behaviors are the result of an instant gratification. We have a feeling, we have an urge, and there's no space, there's no margin, there's no break in between the urge and the action. I want the potato chips, I'm already at the bottom of the bag. I want to watch, I feel stressed or anxious, I go to watching something which is going to give me an escape. Next thing I know, it's 3 a.m, season 1, complete. We feel this urge, and the urge automatically kicks in action. So he says the antidote, the way to make this enormous change in life and to conquer these areas of life that we don't want to be doing is to insert a pause between the urge and the action. Page 27. Number 1, watch the urges. We all have urges to check on email and social media, to eat something sweet or fried, to procrastinate and find distractions. They arise in all of us, but that doesn't mean we need to act on them. The first step is to see the urge rises. What I've done is carried a pencil and piece of paper around and put little tally marks on the paper each time I had an urge. It's a great tool for mindfulness. Then delay. Instead of acting on the urge right when it arises, pause. Don't act right away. Put some space between the urge and your action. Let your heartbeat return to normal, your breathing become a bit deeper. Calm down. Number 3, make a conscious decision. If you decide to indulge in a sweet, it's perfectly fine, but do it consciously. Not just following a whim and an urge. Decide it's a healthy thing for you to do, that you can afford it, that it's a compassionate act for your body. Each decision is best made consciously, instead of gratifying a desire or an urge. Number 4, learn over time. There'll be many times that we give in to urges. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with giving in. The key is to see how that makes you feel afterward and learn whether the decision was a good one or a bad one. And the next time the decision comes up, think back to the previous one and make a conscious decision. And number 5, enjoy the moment without following the urge. Life is meant to be enjoyed, but there are different ways to enjoy it. He talks about it more in the next blog post, and what he calls urge surfing. Urge surfing. Our day is really made up, if you think about it in this way, our day is really made up of a series or a string of these urges that we feel. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shehakol niyeh b'dvaro. We have the urge to stay in bed. Will we hit snooze or will we wake up? We have the urge to run late. Will we be on time nonetheless? We have the urge to eat the thing we shouldn't eat, say the thing, watch the thing, do the thing. Our whole day is informed by the urges that we have. And if we concede, and if we give in, and if we believe that the urge must lead to action, we're done. Because the moment that the urge rises, we're already doing that action. An action which violates a boundary of what we claim to believe. That we want to eat healthy, and we want to live healthy, and we spiritually want to be ambitious. So I want to learn, but then I feel an urge to not learn, instead to do something else. So urge surfing. A mindfulness technique that is proven effective for dealing with addiction is called urge surfing. A widely used technique developed by psychologist, addiction pioneer. Here's how he practices it. Notice you have the urge and pause instead of acting on it and sit with it mindfully. Notice where the physical sensation of the urge is located. Is it your stomach, your chest, your mouth? Focus on that area of the body and mindfully notice the sensations you feel. Allow them to rise and peak and crest and subside like a wave. Watch them as you're watching a wave. It's not anything to panic about. It's a sensation rising and falling. You can do this for a minute or two or longer, and after the urge subsides, it might come back and you can repeat this. You can also move on to other areas of your body where you notice urge-related sensations. Why it works is we interrupt the part of our brain that just acts immediately on urges, and we shift to a new part of our brain. The pattern interruption is crucial dealing with urges. We also learn that the urge isn't anything urgent. It's not a command. It's a sensation. So in other words, when I crave the potato chips, when I crave to tell you that juicy gossip I have, when I crave to watch that thing or go that place, when I crave to lose my cool and act with anger or frustration, usually at the people I claim to love the most who are closest to me, that is an urge. It's not an action. We mistranslate, and we therefore think that the urge is an action. And once it's an action, I can no longer control it. But if I relate to it instead, not as an action, if I relate to it and I name it as an urge, now I can create an interruption and a pause. Now I can feel the urge, I can feel the sensation, and then let it go. I was tired, I got my second wind. I was hungry, now I feel full. I had a craving, but now I no longer desire it. If I name it as an urge and I create that margin and that space, then I'm able to overcome it. He encourages us to change our environment, different coping abilities, fill the urge with something else instead. Where does the urge come from? Does it come from anxiety, stress, worry, fear? Where's the urge coming from? And what's a better release for it? Instead of eating an entire bag of potato chips and binge watching something you shouldn't be looking at, how about going for a walk or a run or making some phone calls? How about taking a bath, having a tea, doing yoga? That's his list, not mine. How about doing these other activities instead? So this for me was a major breakthrough, because I've always felt like when I'm starving for something, I'm already eating it. The idea that you can pause and feel that urge and decide, okay, I felt it, I lived with it, and now I'm letting it go. I don't have to act based on the urge. I can put space between the urge and the action. I can insert margin. I can put a barrier or a break. I can take a moment of time and ask myself, is this really good for me? Is this really what I want? Is this who I am? You know who did this successfully and therefore lived? Two sons of Aaron HaKohen, source 23. Moshe spoke to Aaron and his two surviving sons. We know that his two older sons, Nadav and Avihu, died tragically on opening day of the Mishkan. But Aaron had two surviving sons, and Moshe addressed them. Elazar, Isamar, Banav, his sons, Hanosarim. And wonders Rav Hirsch in source 24, why are they called Nosarim? Why are they not called Nisharim? Nishar would mean the remaining ones. Nosar is another word altogether. We use nosar when it comes to a korban. So why are they called the sons who are nosarim remaining? They should be the sons who are nisharim. And says Rav Hirsch that the word nosar means something which was left over, that could or even should have been consumed or destroyed as well. The nosar of a korban is something that should not have been there. It should not have been left over. It should have been consumed. It should have been gone. Its nosar was left over, but it didn't belong there. And says Rav Hirsch, these two sons shouldn't have survived and shouldn't have been there. They also felt the urge to bring an Eish Zara, a foreign fire. They too, like Nadav and Avihu, their older brothers, they too experienced that urge. But you know what happened? Nadav and Avihu didn't know the Zen habit. So they felt the urge and it led to an action and it led to their demise. But the two younger brothers, Elazar and Itamar, they had a break between their urge and action, says Rav Hirsch. And just because they felt it didn't mean they had to do it. And in between feeling it, they stopped themselves from doing it. And when they stopped themselves from doing it, they survived. You can sit on an urge. You can even name how it feels. I would really love to be eating that, but it's not good for me and I'm not going to. And just because I have that appetite, that urge, that drive, that desire, just because I want to hit snooze and sleep in, just because I want to say that, just because I want to watch that, just because I want to be that way, just because I want to react with anger. There are people around us who disappoint us and who frustrate us in our own families, among friends, in our community, and we're tempted to lash out, and we're tempted to scream and to yell, We're tempted to write a text or an email or to respond to one that matches them and shows them and puts them in their place. There's an urge, it rises up inside us, and we think that I have that urge, and the email's already sent. There was nothing I could do. It's how I felt. There was nothing I can do, aside from which they deserved it, but I felt that way, and it came out. There was nothing I can do. The first thing that we have to admit this time of year is there absolutely is something we can do. We can pause between the urge and the action. We can admit that just because we feel doesn't mean we have to do. There's something in between. Oh, that's number one. Number two is that we're trying to form not habits, but good identity. What's the difference? Pasuk in Dvarim tells us, Jewish people are instructed, we're told we're going into Israel, we're going to inhabit and conquer the land, and when we take over it, we need to destroy, we need to obliterate all the places of idolatry. There were places of misbehavior, they were lewd and licentious, immoral and decadent. We need to go in and we need to abeit abdun, get rid, purge, destroy those places. Why the double language? Rashi wonders, abeid to abdun, go in and destroy. Why the double language? So Rashi says, abeid v'achar kach to abdun, mikan la'okara v'razara shetzorach l'sharash achareha. The double language is get rid of it on the surface, and then you got to go in the root and pull out the root. If you have weeds, you can't just cut the surface of the weeds. If the roots remain, they're going to simply come back. And when it came to the idolatry, when it came to these behaviors and these values and this ideology that had no place in the Jewish homeland and among the Jewish people, abeid to abdun. It's not enough to get rid of it. You've got to get it at its root. You got to destroy it. The Mizrahi, that super commentary on Rashi, wonders, how did Rashi know that? Based on the Sifri, Dim Lokain traced in the Abeit Abdun Lamali. Abeit Abdun, why do I have the double language? To teach me, cut it off on the surface, and also cut it out in its root. Says the Heligas Sfas Emes, says the Gera Rebbe, source 28. I love this Sfas Emes. He says, what can we learn from this message? Not just about tearing out and ripping out idolatry when you conquer the land of Israel, but we can learn about our own lives and how to conquer the own voices that are foreign, that don't belong, that are misguiding and misleading and misdirecting us. In addition to getting rid of the behavior, you've got to go trace the root of the behavior. A person, all addiction, and our communities continue to be proud to partner with Onward Living, BRS, thanks to a tremendous gift by the Wine Pearl family, in memory of their beloved son, Johnny, who lost his life to this dreaded disease. Onward Living, we continue to partner with this beautiful program in our community. And the families who are partnering and those who are in the program and graduates of the program who come to our community, we're so honored and we welcome them. And anyone who works in the world of addiction will tell you that the acting out of addiction, and it can be any addiction, gambling, narcotic, alcohol, intimacy, any addiction that someone is struggling with, it is not the behavior itself. The behavior is an expression of something that's hollow, that's missing, that's hurting inside. A person who's in pain, who's struggling, a person who feels invisible, inconsequential, a person who feels they don't matter or they don't fit in or they can't find their place, tries to numb themselves to that feeling that's so uncomfortable and so overwhelming and so painful that they engage in a pattern of behavior that becomes their escape. It's not about the alcohol, it's not about the gambling, it's not about the drugs, it's not about the intimacy. It's about the escape. It's about numbing themselves. It's about not confronting the reality of how they feel. I did a program with Onward Living, with Moshe Achnes, the founder of the program, and 2 graduates of Onward. 2 young men who grew up Orthodox community, struggled with addiction, had to go inpatient, and then went to Onward Living and had the courage to do this panel. You can still find it and watch it on YouTube. And I strongly encourage you to, particularly this time of year. It's very inspiring. And both of them described in their journey different impacts of different episodes in their youth, people of authority, friends, family, a system that they didn't fit neatly into. And both of them described that when they were young, they walked around with this pervasive feeling all the time of, I just don't fit in. I don't feel comfortable in my own skin. I'm not like everybody else. Something's not right. And then someone gave them a l'chaim. And then somebody gave them some other substance. And for the first time, that feeling, it went away. It went to the background. And then when it wore off, the feeling I don't fit in and I just don't belong and I'm not like everyone else and I'm invisible, nobody cares. It came back until they learned that the habit of engaging the substance that gave them the escape and gave them the numbing, it's really worthwhile to watch. And so the therapy for addiction, and all of us have our own addictions, some of them society puts a stigma on. The person who works all hours, we say, wow, they're a workaholic, so impressive. The person who's fashionable, they're a shopaholic and living in debt, but wow, they're at the cutting edge of fashion. We all have our struggles and addictions. Some of them are labeled and named in society as a stigma, and others we even nasala kemitzvah. Others we even say, wow, so admirable, so admirable. They never sleep because they're addicted to work or not sleeping. That's not admirable, it's an addiction. And any help or therapy intervention with addiction is all about what the Sfas Emes is saying right here. It's not about the behavior. If all you do talking to an addict is talk about alcohol or drugs or gambling, you will never solve the problem. It's like whack-a-mole. I have a good friend who struggled with addiction and he conquered it in one area and then he got addicted in another area and then in a third area because he says if all you're doing is addressing the behavior, like whack-a-mole, anyone ever looking at me like you have no idea? You hit it and then the next one pops up somewhere else. So that if you're empty inside, it's just going to express itself and pop up somewhere else. So abay ta'abdun. It's not enough, whatever habit we're trying to break. Some people here are lazy and procrastinate. Some are underachievers. Some are overweight and unhealthy. And even if not overweight, unhealthy in other physical ways. Some of us are mentally struggling, spiritually, not who we could or want to be. And if we're going to break through, it's not only addressing the behaviors on the outside, the habits, but abay ta'abdun. Says this Sfas Emes, we got to get to the shoresh. We got to get to what's inside. I was introduced to a book this summer. I was introduced to it because Mishpacha magazine had a feature, what are you reading over the summer? And they asked Rabbi Fishbane, a friend of mine, the head of the CRC, and he answered, he was reading an amazing book called Atomic Habits. And a minute later, Amazon Prime was on its way to my house. So Atomic Habits is a phenomenal book. James Clear, I highly recommend this book, Atomic Habits. Atomic Habits. And in these source sheets are several excerpts. We're not going to read them. I know the hour is already getting late. We're not going to read them all. But he makes this critical point at the beginning of the book. And in many ways, this is the thesis of the whole book. Based on the Sfas Emes. I'd like to say it's based on the Sfas Emes. I don't know that James Clear ever heard of the Sfas Emes. True behavior change is identity change. You might start a habit because of motivation, but the only reason you'll stick with one is it becomes part of your identity. Anyone can convince themselves to visit the gym or eat healthy once or twice, but if you don't shift belief behind the behavior, it's hard to stick with long-term changes. Improvements are only temporary until they become part of who you are. The goal is not to read a book. The goal is to become a reader. The goal is not to run a marathon. The goal is to become a runner. The goal is not to learn an instrument. The goal is to become a musician. Our behaviors are usually a reflection of our identity. What you do is an indication of the type of person you believe you are, consciously or non-consciously. We talked about that last year. You are what you do. Or what is your personal brand? Research has shown that once a person believes in a particular aspect of their identity, they're more likely to act in alignment with that belief. So it's true in the positive. If you say I'm a runner, then you're going to run. If you say I'm a reader, you're going to read. If you say I'm a learner, you're going to learn Torah. If you say I'm a davener, you're going to come to davening and value it and be on time and be invested and be mindful of it. But the opposite's also true. If you say I'm terrible with directions, I'm not a morning person, I'm bad at remembering names, I'm always late, I'm not good with technology, I'm horrible at math. If you lock yourself into that mode of thinking, and if that becomes part of your core identity, then your behaviors and your habits are going to come match it. So the thesis of the whole book and how he begins is identity, not habits. Identity, not habits. If you want better results, then forget about setting goals. Focus on your system instead. Most effective way to change your habit is to focus not on what you want to achieve, but on who you wish to become. Not on what you want to achieve, but who you wish to become. You don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. Outcomes, he writes, are about what you get. Processes are about what you do. Identity is about what you believe. With outcome-based habits, the focus is on what you want to achieve. With identity-based habits, the focus is on who you wish to become. It's a simple two-step process. Decide the type of person you want to be and prove it to yourself with small wins. Ask yourself, who is the type of person that could get the outcome I want? The most effective way to change your habits is to focus not on what you want to achieve, but to become. Your identity emerges out of your habits. Every action is a vote for the type of person you want to become. So again, I encourage you to read these pages. I included them in here. You can read the entire book. But again, that's such a different, radical way of thinking about it. Not to isolate the habit. I eat potato chips late at night. I gossip. I tend to get angry. I tend to run late. Don't just address the particular behavior or action, but think about an identity. Who am I? And how do I want to be thought of by others? What's my brand? Am I a learner? Am I a davener? Do I want to be thought of as the stingy one who, Rabbi Magazinich said at Shalashiddah, some people will give their kidney, will give an organ before they'll give to the Kol Nidre appeal. We should start a section because we need kidneys too. We should have a kidney section of the Kol Nidre appeal. That would also help. But some people are stingy. Do you want to be known as the person who never gives? Or is your identity the one with the generous, magnanimous soul? Do you want to be the one who your friend's always waiting for you at coffee or lunch? You're always scrambling into the back of shul? Or do you want to be the one who's on time? What is our identity? Don't change the habit. Think about the identity, and then we'll behave in a way that conforms to the identity and the vision that we have for ourselves. Environment. Environment plays a critical role. And the Rebbe described this so beautifully. The Rebbe Zatzal in Likutei Sichos, in volume Lamed Vav, volume 36, and source 30. He quotes a halacha from the Rambam. We know the Torah tells us that when an ox gores, the first 3 times it gores, the owner pays half the damage that was done. Because why is the owner responsible for the ox? But after the ox has gored 3 times, the ox is now a shor muad. The ox now has a pattern of goring. The ox has a habit of damaging others. And now we hold the owner accountable because we say the owner should have had a shmira, a higher level, a greater level of shmira, a greater level of guarding the animal because the animal had a pattern, a habit of damaging. How do you take an animal that has a status of shor muad and make it a shor tam? How do you take an ox that halachically is now defined as having a pattern of goring and reset and restore to be an animal that doesn't have that pattern, so the owner would only now have to pay half nezek? And the Rambam describes, and the Rambam writes, that if you move the reshus, harashush shenistanis meshana dino, if the animal is under a new owner gets the animal's reset, its status is now short tam, and you only pay half of damages, not full damages. The Rambam ends that halacha. And the Rebbe wonders, where does that come from? And why should that be? If the animal has a pattern, and the animal has a habit, and the animal now is an animal that gores, why should the fact that it has a new owner, why should it change the status or the halachic status of the animal? And he explains for many pages. The right-hand column is the opening part of this sikha, and the left-hand column is the end of the sikha. In between, on your own. The understanding of the Rambam. But I want to skip to the part where he says, Rishus Mishana, that when you change your Rishus, Remez Bepnimius Hashem, it's actually a description of something in each and every one of us. Sure, the ox is the Nefesh Ba'amash Ba'adam. That is the animal voice inside us. Every one of us have a raging ox, and we gore, we damage, we injure others with our speech, with our behavior, with our attitude, with our reaction, in our relationships. We can damage and we can injure. We have this animal inside us, and that ox is the animal in us. Imagine if we unleash the ox. The ox has power. The ox has might. The ox is brazen. The ox is stubborn. If we can channel and direct the animal, the ox in us, to good, we can break through walls. We can repair this world. We can stand up for people. We can make such beautiful changes. Why does Shinu Rishus work? So the Rebbe writes here in the Sikha, because when a person changes their environment, they change their habits. When a person doesn't see themselves based on who they were, but says there's a brand new me, I'm in a new environment, and I have a new attitude, and I have new influences, and I have a new identity, and I now see myself as Shinu Rishus. I am under the supervision and the authority of a new king. When I change my environment, I change myself. And just like the animal, the shor muad, becomes a shor tam, we, the animal in us, can be reset and restored to the tam status. Our habits can be set back to zero, to the beginning, to a fresh start, by changing our environment. Duke University's page 37, source 31, did studies that found exactly this. People like to think they're in control of what they do. Almost half of human behavior takes place in the same location every day and comes cued by the environment. This a reflection back to that Atlantic article. Many of our repeated behaviors are cued by everyday environments, even though people think they're making choices all the time. When you open your cabinet and the cereal you have is Fruity Pebbles, you're not making a choice whether to eat a healthy cereal or not. The same cereals in the same spot at the same time of day, Your environment has already made the determination or decision for the way you eat breakfast every morning. Our environment has an enormous impact on who we are and how we behave. And a change or shift in our environment can enormously change and shift. They found this study that college students who transferred to a new university were able to break their television watching habit if the TV was in a different location at their new school. Students who found the TV in the same location were less successful at breaking the habit. The implication for people trying to stop bad habits or develop new ones is pay attention to the environment. Move something, change something. You're struggling with your davening, get a new sitter, mark it up, let the print be different. You're changing with your eating habits, shop in a new location, bring in new foods, eat at different times. We change our environment, we can change our habits. And that's what he says here as well in Atomic Habits. It's what James Clear writes on page 38. He says that our environment has an enormous impact. We pick up habits from the people around us. We copy the way our parents handle arguments, the way our peers flirt with one another, the way our coworkers get results. When your friends smoke, you give it a try too. When your wife has a habit of double checking that door is locked before going to bed, you pick it up as well. You ever talk to somebody and they have an accent, and the next thing you know, you find yourself talking in that accent, and you never talk and you don't even know the accent. We are a reflection of the people around us. We pick up those habits and we pick up those behaviors. That peer pressure, we conform to social norms, which was a big experiment you see on the next page. Even though on the picture on the right, the middle line is clearly longer than the other two, they did an experiment where they put people in a room who were all actors, and everyone else in the room was like, no, the middle line is the same as the line on the right. And then they asked the people, which is the middle line longer? And if the environment, if the peers all said it's the same, they found that people said, yeah, it's the same length. Even then they knew better. We know better about how to behave. We know better what to think. We know better where to go. We know better what to do. But we are the result and we are the consequence of the people and the environment around us. And that's why one of the most effective things we can do, says Clear, is build better habits by joining a culture where our desired behavior is the normal behavior. Daven around people who take their davening seriously. Eat with people who eat in a healthy way. Have conversations with people who have elevated conversations. Be with people who are ambitious, who have aspirations in the area of life that you want to grow. We are a reflection of our environment. And if we change our environment, then it will conform with the identity we claim we want, and our habits will follow. Who said this clearly? The Rambam. Source 33 in Hilchos Deos. Again, long before James Clear. Torah, timeless Torah. From 3,300 years ago when it was given, knew all of this because God created us. He made us. And the Torah contains all these secrets and messages. And now modern science and pop psychology is only catching up. The Rambam writes, a person's character and actions are influenced by their friends and associates. And therefore, do you want to be connected with community or those who break away from it? Do you want to sit at tables with elevated conversation that challenge you to be better, or that gossip and that criticize and that complain and that are negative about everyone and everything? That environment will determine who we are, how we choose our friends, where we choose our seat, what we choose to do, what clubs we chose to join. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos tells us, stay away from that negative influence, because these influences, the environment, will determine everything about who we are. If we want to be the best version of ourselves, hang out with the people who share that quest, that ambition to have that identity. Torah conditions us, is the environment that we live. That's what the Rambam writes in source 35. How do we condition ourselves? What creates that environment? What creates that goal? What moves those goalposts for us to be our best is Torah. Without Torah, we're stumbling and grappling in the dark. And Torah, Torah is the Gemara in Megillah. Torah is the light. It flips a switch and turns on that light. And it gives us a sense of what matters and what's important and what's a priority, of what to value and how to live, and how we should see ourselves and what should be our identity. That's why we care. Chazon Ish writes in source 36 in his wonderful Sefer Emunah Bitachon that the whole platform of halacha, the whole Jewish lifestyle, From the way we wake up in the morning saying Moda'ani in our lips to the way we fall asleep at night saying Shema, how and what order we tie our shoelaces and wash our hands, what can go in our mouth, what can come out of our mouth. The Torah has something to say about everything we do, because when we live that lifestyle, when we create that environment of that behavior, we are conditioning ourselves to be our best selves, our most godly selves, our most disciplined selves, to achieve the most in our life. He writes in Atomic Habits. He writes in source 37. We're heading into the home stretch. Source 37. He talks about the importance of self-awareness when it comes to changing our habits and our identity. If you have no self-awareness, self-awareness is a uniquely human character trait. The dog or cat doesn't say, how do I look in this outfit? If I eat this, I'm going to gain weight here. The human being is the only one who can step outside themselves and think about themselves. That we can have some self-awareness. Recently, someone told me about somebody who lost their cool in a public setting. Somebody reacted by something that was upsetting to them, that was disappointing to them, and they totally flew off the handle and lost their cool. And this person who's a leader of that setting addressed that person at a later date, calmed the situation, got through the moment, and a day or two later addressed the person and said, I love you, and I welcome you, and I want you, but not that behavior. It's not acceptable. And the person said, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about. I simply said I was upset or frustrated. So the leader who addressed him said, no, you were screaming and yelling, and you flew off the handle. You lost control. You were acting out with rage. And this individual said, you're exaggerating, you're describing someone else, maybe you're confusing me. That's not at all what happened. Many people who behave in certain ways lack self-awareness. That while we're going through that episode, because there was nothing between the urge and the action, something upset us. They started without us, so we went crazy. Instead of saying, okay, I feel a feeling right now that they started without me. I'm frustrated, I'm upset, I'm resentful, I'm hurt, I'm angry, I'm a lot of things. But now I'm going to pause, and I'm going to reflect on how I'm feeling. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to simply sit with these feelings. I'm going to allow myself to feel these feelings right now, and then I'll react. But the person who doesn't put that space or that margin, that pause in between the urge and the action, and the urge immediately leads in and kicks into that action, often has no self-awareness of what they look like or how they sound like or how they've behaved. So self-awareness is a critical key. It is a prerequisite to making meaningful changes in our life, to learning to live with trying to reflect who we are. How do I come across? What's my brand? How do I sound? Do I have self-awareness? He writes, source 37, if you're having trouble determining how to rate a particular habit, ask yourself, does this behavior help me become the type of person I wish to be? Does the habit cast a vote for or against my desired identity? With enough practice, your brain will pick up on the cues that predict certain outcomes without consciously thinking. Once our habits become automatic, we stop paying attention to what we're doing. The process of behavior change always starts with awareness. You need to be aware of your habits before you can change them. How many people think that they're on time? So you need to be aware of your habits. You know what you do? It's called a spreadsheet. And you actually record. How many people think I had a good eating day? I ate healthy today, until you start recording what you ate. I was on time until you start recording what you're timing. I sleep enough. It's not true that someone's yelling at you. You only sleep 4 or 5 hours a night. What are you talking about? I sleep 7, 8 hours a night. Okay, start a spreadsheet. Self-awareness. What gets measured gets managed. Start tracking what you're doing so that you can actually analyze. You cannot change something if you're not honest about what it is. Your finances and your budget. How many people are living in the red and they're in denial of it? They're in debt without knowing it because they're not managing their finances. They're not honest about their income and their expenses. There's no spreadsheet to actually measure it. There's no self-awareness. Pointing and calling raises your level of awareness from a non-conscious habit to a more conscious level by verbalizing your actions, and so on. And he has in the book, you can find it on his website, a habit scorecard to track your habits, score your habits, and try to change or adjust your habits to merge with the identity you claim you want to have. So Atomic Habits claims that we're not going to make meaningful change in our lives and become the version of ourselves that we want to be until we have self-awareness. You know who else said that? Our Holy Torah. Rav Hirsch writes in source 38, Hitpalel, to daven, to pray, is called Hitpalel. Tefillah is derived from the word Hitpalel, but it's a reflexive word. It's Hitpalel. Says Rav Hirsch, the famous idea, we've all heard it, that tefillah is not actually a process of talking to God. Davening, praying, tefillah, is meant to deliver an opinion about oneself, to judge oneself. An inner attempt at doing such is hitpa'el. It's a reflexive. It denotes to step out of active life in order to attempt to gain a true judgment about oneself. You know what davening is? Before I begin my day, I go to Shacharis. Because before I begin my day, I go through the exercise of davening to judge how do I feel? What do I have in store today? What do I need to get done today? How well behaved have I been today? Who am I today? And how am I thought of by others today? Davening is the mirror I hold up to myself to measure myself. Hitpa'el, it's reflexive. I'm trying to measure who I am and who I want to be. And then I go in my day. And you know what? Maybe I started out strong, but then I got distracted and I got tempted. And I didn't behave the way I wanted to be. Mincha comes in the middle of my day. I daven. Here comes the mirror again, called Mincha. Mincha is a mirror, and it says, no. Are you living up to who you said you want to be? Hitpa'el. We are judging ourselves. We're evaluating ourselves. We're measuring ourselves. You claim to care about wisdom. What are you doing to pursue wisdom? Rufainu, you came to value health. Are you living a healthy life? Each time we daven and we talk to God, we're really talking to ourselves. We're measuring and evaluating ourselves. We are trying to have self-awareness of ourselves. It is a radically different perspective on what davening is. Davening is not just about talking or pleading or begging God. Davening is the mirror or the measure. Davening is the spreadsheet that enables us to do a check-in 3 times a day. 3 times a day we check in with ourselves. Are we living the way we've promised and pledged to? Wolbe, source 39, also talks about das atzmo, yedias atzmo, efshar lumod, zoi chavaya, hapokedes es kol bar das ba'amdo al daito. Ein hadrach al asagas chavaya zu. You have to have self-awareness. You're not going to grow. You're not going to improve. You're not going to be your best selves. You can't have meaningful relationships. How can you have a relationship with a spouse if you have no self-awareness of who you are, how you're behaved, how you make others feel? How can you have success with children, with friends, with coworkers? All those people will be having a relationship around the idea of you. But if you don't have any sense of your own self, how can you expect others to have a real relationship with you? It is the beginning of relationships. Self-awareness. The next idea is small goals. Rav Wolbe has another essay, source 40. All these are for you to learn or read, not at night, not now, but in the future. Take them. They're gold. They're beautiful. In his Alei Shor, Rav Wolbe talks about, do you know how you make change in your life? Maisem ketanim. Small, little change. The importance of little change. On the top of the next page, you have it in the translation. It's a translation of what he writes there in Alei Shor. It's normal for a person who wishes to rectify the world to think of a grand method that encompasses great breadth, or of a global organization for peace or justice. Someone who wishes to mend himself also thinks of great and impressive actions of kindness or holiness, where completion can rise to small deeds which barely require effort. But the truth is, a person is built specifically from small deeds. The practice of medicine serves to illustrate. Listen to Rav Wolbe's example. He says the quantity of the active ingredient in a given medicine is tiny, maybe 1 milligram. If the medicine would contain a larger amount of the ingredient, it would cause someone damage rather than heal him. He might even die. This is the first principle of working on oneself. By no means should the method of labor be burdensome. Maisem ketanim, small, little, incremental, measurable change. Change is not overnight. Change is not radical. The change has to be small, baby steps that we could measure and experience its success. Put differently, our rabbi said in source 41, tafasta meruba lo tafasta. Tafasta muat, tafasta. If you try to take on too much, you can't take on anything. But if you take on a little bit, then you're going to be able to take on everything. And here too, Atomic Habits. James Clear has such a beautiful description. I gave you several pages, and you can read it on your own, where he talks about the importance of these small goals. He coins a phrase, the aggregation of marginal gains. The aggregate of marginal gains. Habits are the compound interest of self-improvement. The same way that money multiplies through compound interest, the effect of your habits multiply as you repeat them. They seem to make little difference on any given day, but the impact they deliver over months and years is enormous. It's only when looking back 2, 5, or maybe 10 years later that the value of good habits and the cost of bad ones becomes strikingly apparent. You see that chart, a little 1% improvement over time, 1% every day for 1 year is a 37% improvement. If you want to change your exercise habit, your exercise routine, you want to change your eating habits, you want to change your relationships, your midos, your qualities, your punctuality, your patience, 1% change every day. We could all do that, right? 1%? 1% change to our exercise routine A 1% change. You remember on Behind the Bima, we had earlier this year a couple who celebrated their 80th wedding anniversary. They're both over 100 years old, and they celebrated their 80th wedding anniversary. An amazing couple. And we asked the man, what do you credit your longevity to? So he told us, when I was a young man, I was told, never take an elevator when you could take the stairs. And he said, he lives in Boca West. He said, today, so far, twice, I've taken the stairs instead of the elevator. He's like 105 years old. That's a 1% incremental change. Ever since that Behind the Bima, I've been trying to take the stairs instead of the elevator. You don't have to park in the closest spot. You know, we have this thing. We'll circle the parking lot. There was a spot like 6 parking spots away. And they said, oh, wait, honey, someone's pulling out in the first spot. Back up and go take the first spot because of the extra 3 steps. And where's the parking lot? Outside the gym. 1% change. Little changes. Take the stairs, not the elevator. Park far away every time you go shopping or go to do something. You'll gain a few extra steps. Eat a little bit less. Leave a little left over on your plate. Stop eating a little bit earlier. A 1% change will compound to a 37% result at the end of the year. Tafasta meruba lo tafasta, tafasta mua tafasta. Our rabbis knew this long ago. Maisim ketanim Wolbe. Small changes. Wolbe went to Israel's border with Egypt to encourage Israeli soldiers during the Yom Kippur War. During the Yom Kippur War, we're going to commemorate the anniversary in a few days of the Yom Kippur War. So Wolbe went to the front line to meet with soldiers to give them encouragement during the war. And the Air Force pilots described to Wolbe that the best way for the Israeli Air Force to avoid enemy fire is to fly low. If you fly low, then you could avoid the Egyptian radar. So Wolbe said, I love that. You know why? Because in life, the Yetzer Hara is looking for you when you fly high. The radar, the Yetzer Hara picks up when you set these big lofty goals. I'm running the marathon. I'm never eating unhealthy again. I'm always on time for davening. I'm never gossiping. I'm learning Shas by tomorrow. We set these enormous goals. And then the radar of the Yetzer Hara picks it up. But when we fly low, small, little 1% change, small, little incremental goals, they add up and they compound. And the radar, the Yetzer Hara, can never pick up on it. Just a couple more suggestions, and then I'll let you all go become the best versions of yourselves. Mishnah Pirkei Avos tells us, source 43, that mitzvah goreres mitzvah. Mitzvah goreres mitzvah. I skipped one, I'm sorry. Hold on, go back. Page 49. James Clear talks about something called habit stacking. Anyone ever hear of habit stacking? One of the best ways to improve our habits and our behavior is to stack our habits, one to the other. Habit stacking. When it comes to building new habits, you can use the connectedness of behavior to your advantage. One of the best ways to build a new habit is to identify a current habit you have and then stack your new behavior on top of that. It's called habit stacking. Habit stacking is a special form of an implementation. Rather than pairing your new habit with a particular time and location, you pair it with a current habit. The method, which was created by BJ Fogg as part of the Tiny Habits program, can be used as a cue for nearly any habit. After I pour my cup of coffee every morning, I meditate a minute. After I take off my work shoes, I change into my workout clothing. After I sit down to dinner, I say one thing I'm grateful for that day, and so on. Person struggles. How many people here are prescribed medicines we're supposed to be taking, but we skip a lot of days, we skip a lot of nights, and we forget, and we don't. But if you put the medicine bottle next to your toothbrush, and hopefully you're not forgetting to brush your teeth, then every time you brush your teeth, you're going to remember to take your medicine. That example is called habit stacking. So let's say I never learned, but you know what, when I daven in shul, there's always someone there who afterwards I sit down for a few minutes to learn. I can habit stack my mitzvos. And I argue that's what Chazal meant when they said in source 43 in Pirkei Avos, mitzvah goreres mitzvah. Those are mitzvah stacking, habit stacking. Mitzvah goreres mitzvah. Attach one mitzvah to another mitzvah. When I daven, when I finish, I say Tehillim. After my davening, I do Shnayim Mikra. On my way home from shul, I stop to check in on somebody who I care about. I can stack my mitzvos so that one habit leads to and supports another habit. And lastly, an accountability partner. He has a whole chapter on the importance of not just pledging and promising the changes we want to make, but actually recruiting people to hold us accountable. To make sure that we're doing what we say we wanted to do, that we're going to make our behavior conform to the identity we pledge and promise to have. Chazal, our rabbis also knew this. The pasuk in Koheles, Shlomo Melech tells us, Tovim hashnayim min ha'echad. Two are better than one. And the Torah Tamima says, you know why? Because of accountability partners. Tovim Ashnayim Ha'uskim B'Torah Min Ha'echad She'osek Ki Em Yiplu Ha'echad Yakim Es Chaveiro. If one person falls, you say, remember, we agreed we were going to try not to eat that. Or don't cancel the chavrusa. We said we're going to learn. Or I didn't see you at shul. I thought we were going to go to that minyan together. And we're going to be there 5 minutes early together. We're going to challenge one another. We're going to hold each other accountable. And we're going to push each other to be and become the very best version that we could be of ourselves. We've spent a long evening tonight talking about how we can cut that rope that's holding us back. The habits that we formed in our teen years, our adolescence, or early adulthood, like the elephant, don't have to imprison and hold us back until today. We can break free and we can be the people we want to be and we pledge to be, and we're capable of becoming. There's some people here who are underachieving professionally, who could be earning and could be impacting and could be achieving. But we have to push ourselves to break the habits, those voices of negativity, and the identity of self-defeat and sabotage. There are people here whose relationships are floundering because we fly off the handle, we lose our cool, we're impatient, we get angry, we micromanage, it's our way or the highway. And we think because we feel that urge, we have to act in that way, but we don't. We can sit with that urge until it calms and dissipates. And then ask ourselves, what would be a better way to have the self-awareness of what would be a better way to behave so that we can be loved. In our spiritual, emotional, physical, mental well-being, every one of us can break through this year to be and become the people we were meant to be. The famous escape artist Harry Houdini, he was famous for his ability to break out of the most secure locks and cells and prisons. And one time a warden bragged that he had a prison cell that even the great Harry Houdini could not break out of. So Houdini, of course, accepted the challenge. He was placed in the cell and he began trying to find a way out. And Houdini went into his bag of tricks. He tried everything, every nook, every cranny, every corner, the ceiling of the cell. He tried everything, but even the great Harry Houdini could not find a way out. So finally, out of sheer exhaustion and frustration, he leaned against the door of the cell, and it swung right open. The door had never been locked, and even the great Harry Houdini could not break out and couldn't open a bolt that wasn't locked to begin with. We think that we are imprisoned by our habits. We think that we are imprisoned by our background or by our genetics. We think that we are imprisoned by the life that we've led until this point. But the only thing holding us back and imprisoning us is ourselves. The door is wide open. And tonight I invite you to walk through with me, to picture and to envision an identity, not of who we are and who we were, but who we can become. Not a version of ourselves, but the best version of ourselves. As an individual, to have a self-awareness of our relationship with Hashem. Do I cling to Him? Do I submit and surrender to Him? Do I talk to Him? Do I make time for Him? Do I feel His presence in my life? Am I accountable to Him? What kind of relationships do we want with the people around us? If we're married with our spouse, if we're a parent with our children, how do we want to be thought of as a grandparent? What do we want it to say on our grave? What are the eulogies we want to be given? And how can we reverse engineer our lives to finally let ourselves free to live those lives? The only thing holding us back is ourselves, but it begins with the self-awareness to name our identity, to set those goals, and to be able to make that difference. And please God, when we do, Mirz Hashem, we should be signed and sealed for a year of only tremendous bracha. Kodesh Baruch Hu should see how we've recreated, like the great Rav Hutner said, as enormous as the creation of heaven and earth is our process of recreating ourselves and recreating our relationships and recreating our identity. Let us recreate together. Let us redeem ourselves together. Let us set ourselves free together. Gemara Chasimatu.